Good evening, everyone. I'm going to give it just a minute for people to come in and then we'll get started. As you come in, you should see a poll launch, just a couple of quick questions. You can fill that out and then X out of it. And we'll go ahead and get the ball rolling here tonight. My name is Tal Kitron with Appleroot Tutoring Services. I'm an elite tutor specializing in SAT and ACT prep and an executive function coach. And I've been with the company since 2013 in various capacities. For today, we're going to talk about the EACT, which stands for Enhanced ACT, aka the brand new version of the ACT that's debuting for most of us in September. This is slated for an hour. We'll have you out before the end of the hour, and I'll save some time for questions and answers at the end. So as those do come up, just put them in the Q&A, and I'll get to those when we're done. The recording, this is being recorded, and generally, as I understand it, the recordings are sent out on Friday. That's often a question I get. So just know that if you have registered for this session, for this presentation, the recording should be sent out to you by email on Friday this week. Here's what we're covering today. We're going to look at the format of the brand new ACT and briefly compare it to the previous versions. Talking about what has changed and what is staying the same, which is a lot of it. We'll look at all of the sections, so English, math, reading, and the optional science section, and talk about content as well as strategies. And then just a couple slides about testing timelines, some guidance about when to prep and when to register for the ACT or ACTs. And for those of you who have questions surrounding that, like I said, we'll save some time to make sure we get to those at the end. So here you can tell where we're at in this process is already that middle box. So in April of this year, the ACT online version, which is really only certain schools were doing it on school day tests, that changed into the new shorter version that we're talking about today. For almost everyone else, though, and for people, for example, who are registered for the September ACT in the United States, that's the first test where it's changing. So the past one in July was the old, like the old kind of longer ACT that was very much a time crunch. And then in September, we'll see it's changing to a bit less of a time crunch, a bit of a shorter test, among other things. And then the state and district spring testing in 2026, which will also be in-school tests, that's not changing until next year, next semester. But this EACT that's in the middle here, that's what we're all going to be taking. And so just kind of looking at the difference in sections as far as time per question, I think this is fascinating. And what I see here is that, like, especially for science and reading, which used to be 40 questions in 35 minutes, just a tremendous time crunch, is now less so, which is a good thing. I think the downside will be when there are fewer questions, especially since there are experimental questions on the ECT that don't count. The curve will be harsher, right? A missed question will count more than it used to. But at the same time, at least most people will get to everything, which was a big issue previously on reading and science. But you can see an average of almost like a little over 20% increase in amount of time per question on this test. So here's what we're looking at in terms of scoring and timing. On the left side, we see the scoring. So 8 to 36 points, I guess that's now 6 to 36, because out of English, math, and reading, generally the lowest you can get on each of those would be an 8, and a perfect score would be 36. It used to be until the upcoming test in September that you would take the 4 section scores, average them, and then that's your composite score. Now it's going to be reading, math, and English are averaged. So those 3 added up, divided by 3 to get a composite score. And then science, which has become optional, and we'll talk more about that, but it is no longer a section you have to take. That produces a wholly separate score, which is also out of 36. So if you did opt into the science section, you'd have your composite, which is English, math, reading, and then you'd have your separate science score that you can send for STEM programs, for example. As for the timing, it's down from 75 English questions to 50. 50 questions in 35 minutes gives us a little bit under a minute per question, but a lot of them are pretty quick. Math used to be 60 questions in 60 minutes. It's now 45 questions in 50 minutes. So less time, but many fewer questions. Reading, which was 40 in 35, is now 36 questions in 40 minutes, much more generous. And then that optional science section is only a little bit less fast-paced. It's 40 questions in 40 minutes, which is just 5 more minutes than it used to be. But the only section where we're averaging less than a minute per question is English. And we'll see in a minute, a lot of that is grammar and things that, especially with practice, you can do very quickly, very confidently, very efficiently. So we can expect it to always be in this order. English, 6 passages, 50 questions total. So that means each passage has either 5 or 10 questions. We'll look at that in a second. And then go straight into math. So the first hour and a half is dedicated to English and math, and then we get a break in the middle. This is assuming regular time. Many students have extended time, which is time and a half, or added breaks, or other accommodations. So you have to apply for those when you register. And then after the break, there's reading and science is only if you opt in. Right, so that's 40 minutes for reading, 36 questions, 4 passages, only 3 of which count. It's kind of an interesting thing that we can't really do anything about. And then again, science, which we'll talk about why it's optional and if and when you should take it. That would be for not everybody, but those people who opted in. Then their 4th section would be science. So not including breaks, that's 2 hours and 5 minutes of testing time, down from over 3 hours on the old ACT, which is a great change. So what are we testing? First thing we're going to look at in a minute is English. So a lot of grammar. That's punctuation rules, and it's verb tense and redundancy and keeping it short. Then high school math, a little bit of everything. Arithmetic, algebra 1 and 2, geometry, trig, and then sprinkling of pre-calc. So if you've taken or are taking that, that will be helpful. But the big one you want to make sure you've taken before you take an ACT in school is algebra 2. Throughout, there's some reading comprehension, really on all 4 sections. And then on reading, there's vocab and context. Not a lot, but a little. And then graph reading and data interpretation, definitely on the math, but mainly via that optional science section. What I've always said about the SAT is it's know a lot about a little, kind of a very finite amount of things they test, and you just need to be an expert in that. The ACT is more know a little bit about a lot, especially on math. It's like, hey, you remember what logarithms are? Here's a point. Do you know matrices or how to do them in the calculator? Here's another point. But then they'll jump to percentages or mean, median, mode, right? So a bit all over the place, but not requiring very in-depth knowledge. Harder to review for, though. I think that's what's tricky on the math of the ACT in particular. So before we get into each individual section, let's just talk overall strategy. Thing you got to do before you take your official ACT, your first one is practice pacing, because it's still a fast test. Always going to the question and thinking, what am I solving for? Answer what the question's really asking. And then keeping it simple. There's almost always a simple solution method. And finally, don't leave answers blank. There are no points off for wrong answers, so no omission penalty. But do strategically skip around. If you find yourself stalling out on a passage or a question, right, or a math problem or concept, you don't want to spend forever on it. It's probably better to miss it in a short amount of time than to spend 3, 4, or 5 minutes on it and get it right. So this is not a test to be a perfectionist on, right? Very rarely will that pay off. It's more about just let's grab all the points we can as quickly as we can and confidently. It's hard to find your comfort zone on timing until you've practiced. Applewood's got at least one new enhanced ACT, I think maybe two now. And then there's also a free one on the ACT website. So it would be very wise to go and just practice it to get a sense of where and when do you run out of time. That way you can address it. So first step's English, 6 passages, 3 or 4 medium passages of 10 questions each, and then 2 to 3 accordingly short passages of 5 questions each. We don't really need to spend much time with the information in English. It's more just what choices and answer and questions back to the passage, right? Just to see the context and what they're testing. If it's a grammar question, which is over half of the questions we'll see, it's all about trusting the rules and trusting your ear. Does it sound good? Or does it sound wrong? And then we'll eliminate those. And then rhetoric, that's more about, does it flow well? Is it on topic? Is it a smooth transition? So kind of trusting our reading comprehension skills and doing a little bit more of the reading for context on those particular questions. We've usually got a job to do that we can robotically accomplish. So if it's a grammar question, it'll probably look like this. And the tip is use the answer choices right away. So go straight to answers, which are on the right side of the page generally, and just figure out what's being tested. Is it punctuation? Is it pronouns, possession, or in this case, subject-verb agreement? Right? I see verbs, which could be verb tense, but then glide versus glides. Well, that tells me, oh, they're testing either is it plural or singular, and they'll probably try to trick you with a subject way before the verb, or in this case, the verbs before the subject. Even though it's weird to say mountaintops glides, what we're actually saying is the eagle glides. An eagle is a singular it. You can't say eagle glide. So over the mountaintops glides the majestic great eagle. This one would be C. And if we can identify the question type right away, that's not tense switch or clauses, it's subject verb, then we won't even be tempted to look at B or D, those ing verbs in past tense. Here are 3 examples. Just going to leave them up for a minute since I know a lot of you guys are just students, thinking about tools to prepare for practice or official ACT. So take a look at these and just try them, and then I'll explain the answers in a moment. So I'm looking at these now. Your eyes should immediately go to the right-hand side of the page. It's always questions first and choices first when it's grammar, which all these are. And on number 1, I'm looking at a semicolon, which is A, no change, and then a colon, which is D. Those would be the 2 ones to test first because they have the most definitive rules. The rule for a semicolon is on this test, it's a period. It must separate 2 full sentences. So the first sentence is complete. Divers off the coast of Japan discover a surprise on the seafloor. But the second part, circular patterns made of sand, is not. So A cannot be right. Then the rule for D, with test writers knowing that people are uncomfortable with colons and test takers don't want to put it as an answer unless it's a list, they're going to make it correct a lot of times. All we need for a colon and the exact rule is it must follow a full sentence, so independent clause before, and it's a drum roll introduction. So here they discovered a surprise on the seafloor, colon, drum roll please, what was it? Circular patterns made of sand. So definitely D as in dog for number one. For number two, it's testing purely commas and then also the verb, contained, containing, contains. So if I'm looking at the verb part of it, it's saying they were often over 7 feet. So I don't think C or D make a whole lot of sense. C is a fragment and D is the wrong tense. Then it's a matter of, can I get away with no comma, which is B, or do we have two separate ideas, which would make me need a comma? And in this case, it's A, because it's saying the circles were often over 7 feet in diameter and contain concentric rings and ridges. That's one idea. Pausing and then making them appear much like a target or landing pad. You can trust your ear there, because if you read B, contained concentric rings and ridges, making them appear much like a target or landing pad, it's combining two ideas as one. So in this case, I'd love to get away with no comma, but we can't. And then for three, already, if we think back to the rule for number one, that semicolons are periods, B and D are identical. They're both wrong because they can't both be right. So if periods are semicolons, that means B and D on three are the same and both wrong. And then a dash usually requires or begets another dash. So in this case, a comma is more appropriate. The divers were baffled by the discovery, and although these patterns are short-lived, as currents gradually erode them away, the circles would periodically appear. So I think the dash is too big of a stop here, and the comma is just right, separating independent and dependent. That's generally how it goes. You just have to do a bunch of those questions in not that much time. And so getting good practice at identifying what's being tested and then eliminating bad answers is really the key. Grammar topics you should expect to see besides punctuation and clauses would be verb tense, subject verb agreement, pronoun error, so that would be who, whom, I, me, which a lot of people are confident on but should not be. Even adults get that wrong every day. Possession, so apostrophe S, with the exception of IT apostrophe S, which means it is. Modifiers, that's about words moving around. A lot of connector questions. So however, nevertheless, therefore, consequently. And then big thing is, when in doubt, pick the shortest answer, redundancy or brevity. Keeping it short and sweet is a big thing still in the English section. And then last thing of English before we move into the math section is rhetoric. So sprinkled in among the grammar questions are these actual questions where you have a job to do. That could be like adding or deleting information, or just accomplishing a task of some sort, or placing a sentence or word somewhere. Your job, if they're asking you like whether we should add something to the passage, would be only say yes if it stays on topic in transitions. And if it does, it'll be pretty clear. And if it doesn't, it'll be pretty bad. So here we don't have enough context to really do this question, but we'd always want to pick yes or no first. And then from there, generally pretty easy to decide which logic explanation makes sense. So rhetoric's different than grammar. It's not about short and sweet or how it sounds. It's more about let's just do our job like a robot. Here's an example question that we can try. And this one, I mean, at first it looks intimidating more than grammar, but our job is just provide specific info about hobbies. So in the underlined portion, it's saying things I find very boring or games I like, which is potentially hobbies, but not very specific. And you look at B and it's just perfect. Playing with Legos or designing complex Lincoln log masterpieces. I mean, those are two examples of the hobbies that this person's little brother clearly enjoys. I don't need to understand the passage or really get too involved in it. I just know this is the most specific hobby-based answer. And C and D don't quite do the job. So in that case, we picked the longest answer because it wasn't grammar related. We just wanted the most specific. Rhetoric skills that you can expect to be tested are order and placement, writer's goal, so that'll be at the end of the passage. The writer meant to accomplish this, did they? Yes or no, and why? And then add, delete, and accomplish a task, which we just saw. Be a robot, don't paraphrase, just look at the question and eliminate answers that do not stay on topic or do not flow. And I recommend in the test booklet marking things off, doing everything first in the test booklet and then moving that over to the Scantron sheet. Because although this ACT is shortening, it's not on the computer like SAT, everything's still on paper for 99% of us. My final tips and tricks on English. Make sure you're differentiating between strategy for grammar and rhetoric. Grammar will have like a no change option and 3 basic choices that you just punch in or not. Shorter answers are better and you can trust your ear and specific rules. Whereas for rhetoric, we slow it down a bit. We need context and to read more on the passage side, making sure we just transition smoothly and stay on topic. That would be a good thing for rhetoric. On English, you got to treasure each question as if it's worth a point because it probably is, right? There's only 50 questions and 36 available points. So with the curve being what it is and the fact that I think only like 41 of those questions are actually counted, like 9 of the 50 are experimental and won't count. We never know which. But because of that, the curve is going to be harsh and every question will be worth at least 1 point, if not more. We can master those grammar rules. That's probably the easiest section score to boost in my experience as a tutor, working with students, but also even giving them materials to do on their own. All right, let's talk math. So section 2, and probably the one we'll spend the most time on, maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then home stretch for reading and science. Math is 50 minutes for 45 questions. Although the questions on the right have 5 answer choices, they have changed it. So now you can expect everything to have 4 choices. This is from an old ACT. There are no formulas provided, but they will test geometry and trig stuff. So there are a few things worth memorizing. And you do get a graphing calculator, TI, 80, whatever. Pretty much almost all calculators at this point are allowed throughout the test. There's not a no calc section. However, it's not like SAT where there's a built-in Desmos calculator on the digital version. You just have your own handheld. And as I mentioned before, it's know a little bit about a lot. It's a grab bag of a bunch of concepts. Even on this little cross section, you see a logic question with a lot of words, a geometry, perimeter, area, volume question, and an inequality algebra question. Our strategy. Rule number 1, circle what you're solving for. Literally circle it in the test booklet or underline it. Rule number 2 is translate word problems into math. So if you see words, you want to make it like is means equals, of means multiply, and so on. Show your work. Every math teacher ever, I'm sure, has told you that, and use your calculator to full advantage. And then check your answer within reason, because we're moving pretty quickly, but at least do a quick logic check after each question. And if it's one you had to skip or you weren't sure about or you went too quickly, just mark it for review and come back, assuming, again, we have time at the end. So let's look at a couple math problems. One big thing we'll notice is trig. A lot of people have just forgotten this stuff. And so here, the only thing you need to do is remember SOHCAHTOA. That's a thing, right? You'll also have to know about Pythagoras and special right triangles and other rules, but here it's just what is the tangent of angle A? TOA, opposite over adjacent, that would be answer choice A. Opposite of angle A is side A, and adjacent, which means next to, is B. So that's one that, again, if you know just a little bit and remember this from math class or reviewed it recently, it's very easy. And if not, it feels impossible, especially like if we're in summer mode and haven't thought about this stuff at all. Another trig type of question. So actually, I think the last one was more trig. This is Could be trig, could also just be like geometry and Pythagoras. Because in this case, they're saying a ladder leans against the wall. It's 26 feet long. That's the hypotenuse. And then the base is 24 feet from the wall. That's the base, the bottom leg. The question is, what's the other leg? So if we're looking at a right triangle and it's not a 30, 60, 90 or 45, 45, 90, which are things to go back and look up because they test them but do not provide those rules. But here we know two sides of a right triangle. We're trying to find the third. That's Pythagoras, which is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. We know c is 26. We can assign a or b to 24. It doesn't matter. It's one of the legs. We'll make it a. So that means 24 squared plus b squared or x squared equals 26 squared. Then we just do the computation. We calculate 24 squared is 576, subtracted from 676 is 100. B squared is 100, so b is 10, and that's our answer. This is actually a 5, 12, 13 multiple, which is not very important, but could have provided a quick shortcut if you're really strong with this stuff. But then again, Pythagoras, if you remember that, is good enough to solve most of those special right triangle questions. Here's a probability problem. We got a bag contains 9 macadamia nuts, 13 cashews, and 18 peanuts. How many additional cashews must be added so that the probability of randomly drawing a cashew is 2/5? This is a headache, and one that a lot of people kind of will immediately start yawning and not love, which is a sign that you might want to skip it and come back. However, the answer choices are nice to work with, so that's an option. The other option is focusing on kind of the other end of this question. Here, if we're being asked what should we add to make this probability change, we actually want to focus on what isn't changing, and that is not intuitive at all. But instead of figuring out how many cashews must I add, figure out, well, I've got this amount of macadamias and peanuts already. How can I make those 3/5, which would be the remainder of the total? So instead of focusing on cashews being 2/5, we'll make the other nuts be 3/5. That's 27 total, 9 plus 18. So 27 over what equals 3/5? 27 is to x as 3 is to 5. That's either calculator or cross multiplication question. 5 times 27 is 135 equals 3x. X is 45, which is the total that we need. And then double check what we're being asked. How many more cashews must we add to get 45 total? Well, we already got 27. So we need 18 total cashews. We already have 13 cashews. So that's 5 that we're adding. Therefore, it's B as in boy. And at long last, we're done. This is a much harder question than the others we've seen. Final tips and tricks for math, pending any questions that come up later. Show your work, use your calculator. Prioritize easier questions, which are often early, but they've mixed them in now kind of throughout. And so something that's easy for you also might not be easy for someone else and vice versa. So if you're stuck on a trig question or a circles question or something you're just blanking on, feel free to skip it and go grab easier points. It is okay not to get to every question, but don't leave anything blank. And my recommendation is just pick D as in dog straight down the line. If time's running out, that way, you're probably going to get at least a few of them correct. If you guess on like 10 straight down the line, you won't miss them all. But if you Christmas tree it and go A, B, C, D, C, B, A, B, C, D, you probably will miss them all. So just probability wise, you're better off guessing straight down and getting a few of them right. I recommend to review basic geometry and trigonometry rules, as well as stats stuff like mean, median, mode. Got to know which is which. Scratch paper will be provided. You can also write in your test booklet and should always draw shapes if they didn't do it for you. And then didn't talk much about this, but if you get stuck, use the answer choices to work your way backwards, just testing, or plug in your own numbers, right? Like a 0 or a 1 sometimes works, but usually 2 is a good number because it's low and even and prime. And that's often a good way to make abstract algebra problems less so. So that's math. Let's talk reading. We're doing well on time, so I think probably about 15-ish minutes left on the slides and then some time for questions. Pacing is big on reading. So you see on the left-hand side, the structure, 40 minutes for 4 passages, 9 questions per passage for 36 total. And we don't know which of the 4 passages won't count, but that is one of the new things, is one of the 4 passages, like 9 of the questions just won't count. And again, as a test taker, there's not much you can do. They're just embedded as experimental. So it's really only 27 questions that are being scored. So again, the curve is going to be harsh, and to get a really great score, we need to be perfect or close to it. I wouldn't spend more than about 3 or 4 minutes on a passage. So reading in 3 to 4 minutes, and then 30 seconds per question, maybe a little bit more, but I would say if you wanted to practice, that would be a good rule of thumb to start with. All you have time to do is read a question, eliminate answers, pick one and move on. That word annotate might scare you. I don't really mean annotate, I mean take notes. So if you tag things on the first pass through the passage on your 3 to 4 minute read, the idea is paraphrasing, putting little notes in the columns, starring, circling, underlining. That way you don't have to spend as much time going from questions to answers to passage and back. We don't have time to do that. But it's not really annotating or analyzing. It's taking simple outline notes. Common questions you will see include, how is the passage organized? So what is most nearly this passage's structure? Those are hard ones. What's the point of view of the narrator? What is the main idea of the passage or of paragraph 4, for example? And a lot of specific detailed questions. As used in line 7, the word blank most nearly means what? And then 4 choices each time. For the reading part, so the 3 to 4 minutes that we take per passage, active reading is essential. And active reading is pencil in hand, marking up the passage by underlining, circling, starring, and most importantly in bold down there, taking simple notes. The goal being not to remember everything or like analyze or think about it or take note of everything that you read. It's just to tag where you saw things, right? So like, hey, here's the experiment. Here are the methods in paragraph 2. Paragraph 3 is the findings, and paragraph 4 is future possibilities. If you have that written in the margins, it's going to be really nice on the questions because you'll know exactly where to go back to. This active reading is especially helpful in the sciencey passages, which from what I can tell in the new ACT, it'll start with literature and then go informational, informational, informational. So a couple of those will be sciencey and one maybe more humanities, but only one of these will be prose fiction literature, which is the first passage. For that one, you can immerse yourself and really just get the vibe and the characters and relationships. But for anything informational, really want to kind of break it down and paraphrase into most simple notes that you can. If you know that you like the informational stuff better than literary narrative, then maybe skip passage 1 or skip that one and don't go in order. You can also strategically skip questions to preserve your timing, your confidence, your momentum, your comfort. So I think spending more than a minute on a question is too long. If you've narrowed it down, then that's, I think maybe you stick with it. And if you haven't, and you're still at 3 or 4 answers remaining, gotta abandon ship, right? Come back if you have time, but move on and get easier points. And then when you get to the questions and answers, so after reading for a few minutes, the goal will be find the words the test writers, these basement dwellers who write test questions all day, every day, find words that make the answers wrong, because they're going to write a question and a correct answer, and then 3 to fool us. Words like never, always, only, all are really big red flags. Those would be throwaways more often than not because they're too sweeping. We want to look for bad answers instead of a good answer. So eliminate based on what the writers want me to see as bad. And answers we like are sparrows. They're small, unassuming answers, not flashy peacock answers. So sometimes more vague is good, and we don't want to be too specific or flashy. And that comes with practice, just getting a sense of what type of reading answers generally tend to look good and work well. And finally, a common reading trap would be inferring versus assuming. The tests sometimes say, what can we best infer, or what does this imply or indicate? But that doesn't actually mean assume. It means work with what the passage is telling you and make a very basic next step. Don't bring in outside information ever. If you're ever doing that, you're working too hard. So if you look at a choice and you think, oh yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess I could see why that would be true. It's usually wrong. We're probably trying to justify it. It should be more obvious than that. And then last section, science. As I mentioned, it is optional. You can pay $4 to opt into it. Why would we do that? Well, if you're a STEM star and you want to go into something to do with science or engineering or math or tech, you may still want to showcase your skills, especially depending on where you're applying, right? But if you're in Atlanta and Georgia Tech is somewhere you want to go, they probably still want to see your science score. It'll be scored out of 36 like the others, but a standalone, so it does not impact your composite score anymore. And it remains to be seen exactly how colleges will handle this, because some people already have science scores in place from the old ACT, and then they're going to take the new one. And so the super scoring of that is kind of complicated, and you'd have to look up the rule for each particular school. But science optional. So section 4, maybe we take it, maybe we don't. If we do, here's what we'd expect. 40 questions, 40 minutes, 7 passages. Each passage has up to 7 questions and at least 5. So got to move fast through 7 fairly complicated and different passages, each of those with graphs, charts, and a whole lot of information, not all of which we need to understand. So a couple of ways to demystify the section, and it's really, for a lot of people, the hardest, particularly because it's always last. So assuming we're taking science, you want to stay on the surface. It's a little bit more sciencey than it used to be on the old ACT, but still many of the questions are just matching the graphs. So don't get bogged down by all of the extra information or the science that you're like, oh, I learned this and I forgot. That will happen. Our job really is look at the questions and answers and match those words to the charts and graphs. If there's more to do after that, then we'll address it. But a lot of the questions are still just questions, choices, graphs, we're done. Common traps or pitfalls. Make sure you go to the graph or chart the question actually says. If it says according to table 1 and we're spending time on table 2 or figure 3, that's a problem. We don't have that time. If the question says according to the passage or based on the table and the passage, the writers are telling you that you do need some of the text, so you better go find it. And then you don't want to, this is hard for some people, but don't care about the science, just make the match. So which answer is inarguably true based on a graph? And if we need context, we go find it. So being, again, kind of robotic and just not working too hard to understand the true meaning behind the passage or the science. So what will we see in graphs? You're looking for trends, relationships, and then sometimes they ask you to infer or extrapolate something given that trend. And the harder questions are scientific method stuff. So like what was used as the independent variable or the control? Why did the scientists do this? How did the experiments differ? Those are much more text-based questions, more often than not. Here's just a quick example I wanted to look at. And I've got a few of those, and we'll talk testing timelines. Here we go straight to the question. Based on the results shown in table 2, which is the only table that we have provided, a sequoia that produced sap for a period of 370 years would most likely have a sap production, and then you've got these 4 choices, which to me seems like it probably matches here. And indeed, sap production would be right there. The next 2 columns look similar, but I don't think that's what they're mentioning, at least for what we're solving for. But if it produced sap for a period of 370 years, then it's down here. So this would be a relationships question, drawing arrows down to the biggest number. As the sap production period goes up, sap production also goes up. So direct relationship. And so what we can see is if we're at 370, we'd also be over 3640. Don't need to know exactly what, just looking at the trend, it's definitely choice D. So that'd be one that we could knock out in under a minute and be extremely confident that we got it right. Whereas there are going to be certain questions where it's just, geez, I didn't like these answers. I picked the one I hated the least, and that's all that you can do on occasion. Another one, sorry that the question itself is a little bit condensed. Here where you're asking which of the following surface temperatures, so all these answers are surface temperatures, would the luminosity of a star in galaxy B be closest to 2 times the luminosity of a star in galaxy B with temperature of 3000? So we'll start with what we know, which is at a temperature of 3000, looks like galaxy B has an RL of 1. I'd probably go back to the passage when there was one to see if that's relative luminosity, which it is. So at 3000, we're at 1. The question is, when would it be closest to 2? And that looks like between 32 and 3400, which is going to be G, 3300. In this case, it's not perfectly at 3300, but close enough. And generally, there will only be one perfect answer that we can prove. So that's when it's twice as much. We wanted the B dashed line the whole time. They didn't ask us about A, C, or D here. Here's another kind of more direct relationships question. In figure 3 on the left, as the surface temperature of a star increases, the average size does what? Well, it starts out kind of up a little bit and then up a bit more, flattens, but it never plateaus. It never goes down. This is B. Sometimes it's almost alarming how simple the questions are, and that can take people off guard. Final tips and tricks for science, optional science section. Number 1, glance at the graphs. When you start, don't go straight to the questions. Try to process what's happening, but don't try to understand everything that's going on. That's a fool's errand. Then for each question, actively read. So mark it up, circle what you're solving for, and go straight to the answers, which you will then match back to the figures or graphs or tables. If there's no match or it says use the passage, then use the passage for context. And then if there's still no match and you just can't figure it out, don't have time to dwell, use common sense, think like a 8th grade scientist, not a rocket scientist. Pick one and move on. Elimination is still part of this, but it's really all about matching and then just only thinking and using science when we need to. A little bit more commonly than we used to, but still most of them are going to be matching. Just a couple quick notes. So September, the EACT that's coming up next month, well, 2 months from now, is the first one with this new enhanced version. And they're still offering what's called now the My Answer key, which is getting the full test back. So in February, September, and December, so really 3 of the next 4 ACTs, you can order the answer key by doing this. And this is a huge resource if you plan on taking multiple ACTs. So you want to make sure you get this. You get a copy of the questions, the answer document, the key. And so then a few weeks later, you can review that on your own or with a tutor. Massively helpful resource. So this is on the ACT webpage. If you're taking September or December or February, highly recommend getting this. So common questions, just to kind of get some of those off our plate, and then I'll open it up to you guys. When should I begin preparing? Typically at the end of junior year. Some people start earlier, especially if they're very high scoring. And it's tough because junior year is so hard. A lot of people are taking many APs, so you got to kind of try to plan around that, plus sports or music or extracurriculars. But typically you see after Algebra 2, or at least you got the first semester under your belt. Most people by junior year are taking more like pre-calc stuff. Another question I get that is impossible to answer is, what is a good score? Depends on where you start, depends on your goals. Really, a good score is something that makes you competitive and a good candidate for the schools you're applying to. As far as applications and sending test results, the ACT automatically super scores now, which we didn't get into much because it's a bit convoluted with the new enhanced ACT. But generally, if you take multiple tests, most colleges will look at only the highest section scores from across multiple sittings. So if you took English and got a 30 and math a 35, but then the next time it flips, most schools would only see the 35 and 35. You don't have to send all scores. There's very few colleges that require that. And so just send what makes you look good. If it doesn't help your application and you have an option not to send, then you won't. 3 is the number of tests that it usually takes people to reach full potential. There's not a wrong time to test unless you're woefully unprepared or super burned out and you've taken 10 already. But 2 or 3, definitely don't plan on being one and done. It puts unnecessary pressure and it's generally not realistic, right? You want to get that test in a timed environment and then take it at least once more to really reach that full potential. And then my final piece of advice is this is not a test of intelligence, neither ACT nor SAT. Definitely does not measure you as a person. It's just a test of effort and how well you do on the test on that day. So if you put in the effort, you learn what the test is all about, you know what to expect, then you can't really put much pressure on yourself aside from that, right? This is not how smart you are, and the scores don't define us. So all you can do is what you can. And yeah, I'm wishing everyone good luck on the test prep journey. I'm going to launch one last poll. We are done with our slides. And so if you don't have questions and you feel like, all right, I get it, feel free to call it a night, and thank you for joining. Here's that last poll. And then if you do have questions or thoughts or just kind of want to look into tutoring or test prep or EF coaching, which is more about prioritization, planning, organization, reach out to this number, or I think the number here too. Yeah, email below at info@outberoof.com. Again, my name is Tal Kitron. You can request to work with me as a tutor, but we have a lot of amazing tutors, both for SAT, PSAT, ACT, and subjects in school. But yeah, without further ado, let's see if there's any questions. I haven't seen any yet, but I'll leave it open for a bit to see if any come through. First question is, does the new science test weigh into the super score the same way other test scores do now? And the answer is no, it doesn't. Colleges, it's unclear exactly what they're going to do. The most complicated situation is if you've already taken an ACT with the current version and you have a science score, and then you take another one and don't take the science. The super score will not automatically include your science score. But if you do take the optional science, then I think some schools will count your prior paper ACT, the non-enhanced version, science score. So like that's a terrible answer. It's convoluted. But I think my short answer is no. The composite and the super score do not include science, with a few exceptions, like if schools are looking at old tests, old ACTs, along with new. But if you took the July test and you're taking September, I'd really look into what each college is doing, look into the admissions office so that you know, should I take the science? What does that do to impact whether they include it in my super score or not? It's a good question, but it's like a very, very hard one to answer. So I can't confidently say for sure whether a school would super score including science or not at the moment. The general rule would be take science if you are a STEM person and you have like an inkling the school might want it, you should take it, you should opt in. But if you know that that's not going to be what you pursue and the colleges you're applying to don't care, skip it. Just do the 3 sections and focus your energy there. Leave it open for a couple more minutes and just see if anything comes in. But again, if you are satisfied, hope you got a lot out of it, and feel free to take off and enjoy the rest of your evening. Seeing no more questions, feel free to email the info@applewith.com if they do come up. This recording should get sent out later this week. Again, thank you everyone for joining, and have a great rest of your week.